Welcome, and very warm greetings to you all. Thank you for joining us again for another Pariyatti Presents event. My name is Briha Sarathi, and I'm here on behalf of Pariyatti as its Executive Director. We're grateful that you've all joined us today. For those of you who are not already familiar with Pariyatti, we're a non-profit charitable organization based in the USA. Our mission is to enrich the world by disseminating the words of the Buddha, providing sustenance for the seeker's journey, and illuminating the meditator's path. Pariyatti imports books from around the world, reprints books, publishes new titles, and converts existing material into digital formats. We protect and provide an enormous catalog of Dhamma resources in many languages and formats that otherwise would not be as easily available. We offer many free services, such as the Pariyatti Learning Center, Treasures of Pariyatti, and Daily Words for Inspiration via email, RSS feeds, and our mobile app. We offer most audio and video material, as well as many ebooks and audiobooks free of charge, including a large number of resources for students at SN Goenka. We also organize donation-based residential Pali workshops and facilitate pilgrimages for Vipassana meditators. For more information on Pariyatti, please do visit our website at pariyatti.org. That's PARIYATTI.org. Please note that in order to ensure a seamless experience for our audience, we've chosen to pre-record this interview with Dr. Paul Fleischman. The question and answer portion will be live, and Dr. Fleischman will be responding to questions we received during this event. So, please feel free to send your questions via the chat feature in Zoom, and send them to the user named Send Questions Here. So for those of you who are not already familiar with Dr. Fleischman, he's a retired psychiatrist, an author, and a Vipassana teacher appointed by SN Goenka, specifically for presenting Vipassana to Western audiences using scientific concepts. Dr. Fleischman obtained his MD in 1971 and trained in psychiatry at the Yale University School of Medicine, where he also served as a chief resident in psychiatry. He was a psychiatric consultant to numerous hospitals and clinics, and lectured at conferences, universities, and institutions throughout the Americas, Europe, and Asia. His many Pariyatti publications include Cultivating Inner Peace, Karma and Chaos, Vipassana Meditation, the Scientific Worldview, etc. Now, retired from a more than 30-year private psychiatry practice, he lives in rural New England with his wife Susan, who is also a Vipassana teacher in the tradition of SN Goenka. Dr. Fleischman's talks and articles are addressed to students looking for clarification about Vipassana's logic, utility, and psychological, biological, and spiritual effects. So today, Dr. Fleischman is interviewed by Kory Goldberg. Kory has a PhD in religious studies from the University of Quebec in Montreal, Canada, and he teaches ethics, critical thinking, religion, and sustainability at Champlain College in Saint-Lambert, Quebec. He co-authored Along the Path, The Meditator's Guide to the Pilgrimage in the Buddha's Land, and is a general editor of the Pariyatti Journal, as well as a Vipassana teacher in the tradition of SN Goenka. So without further ado, I give you Paul and Kory.
Welcome, everyone, to the second episode of a series where we'll be exploring Paul's latest book, The Power of Small Changes, Vipassana Meditation through the Lens of Biology, Psychology, and Culture. This book is a curated collection of Paul's introductory and old student talks, university lectures, and essays delving into Vipassana meditation from the perspective of cognitive science, as well as topics concerning the psychological safety in meditation and non-sectarianism. The aim of these interviews that I'll be doing with Paul is to further examine, clarify, and deepen our understanding of the central themes laid out in the book. So each session or pair of sessions will highlight a different section of the book. In the last episode, we discussed the psychosocial aspects of meditation that were presented in the university talk segment. In today's episode, we'll focus primarily on the neurobiological dimensions. So if you have any questions for Paul, please type them into the chat. Please try to keep your questions as focused as possible in relation to the topic at hand, so we can maintain a clear focus throughout the conversation. So Paul, several of your essays discuss the concept of homeostasis and its role in meditation. Can you explain what you meant when you wrote that, open quote, meditation is the skillful application of homeostatic regulation of the mind, body, and emotions, close quote? So, what exactly is homeostatic regulation? And can you elaborate on how understanding homeostasis could enhance our meditation practice and even apply it in our everyday lives?
Homeostasis is a word that comes from biology. It refers to the fact that living creatures, all living creatures, single cellular creatures like amoebas, intelligent creatures like ourselves, or any other creature, any squirrel, any lion, all living things, including animals and plants, regulate themselves in thousands upon thousands of processes. Even an amoeba, which is very small, still has thousands of self-regulatory processes going on. And the regulation, homeo means the same, and stasis means constancy. So the word doubles down on the idea that in order for life to exist, we have to retain a certain level of psychological and biological constancy. If we can't regulate ourselves back towards this constancy, we die. This law was first described or discovered, as far as I know, by the Buddha, who called his teaching the middle path. The middle path means regulating towards the middle and not permitting extremes. And as we learn to meditate, one of the very first things we become aware that we're doing is reducing our tendency to allow our thoughts to roll in extremes. But we're also dealing with our mind and our body as an integrated entity when we're meditating. Let's take a few very basic examples of why homeostasis is the law of life, the law of life, the most important thing about living things. So if your temperature is 98.6, you're doing fine. If your temperature goes up to 100, you become ill. If your temperature goes up to 105, 6, or 7, you die. The same is true for hypothermia. If your temperature is 98.6, you're fine. If your temperature is 96, you may feel chilled, you may feel tired, you may not feel well, but you're still okay. If your temperature goes down to 80, you're dead. So our temperature is organized to exist in a very, very small window, somewhere between, let's say, 90 and 105. Whereas the temperatures in the universe can be hundreds of degrees below zero, as in outer space, or millions of degrees above zero, like in the sun. But our bodies never oscillate to that extreme degree. The oscillations are dampened by the regulatory processes of life. Now, when we're meditating allowing all the sensations to be entering our awareness and to experience them directly without editing them. We're not trying to limit them or constrain them. But the process of observing is itself a regulatory process. It means that, for example, if you're very agitated and upset while you're meditating, it's hard to observe your sensations. And so there's a learned skill in how to come back to self-observation and non-judgment, self-observation at the level of body, mind, sensations. And that self-observation brings our sensations back into focus, and that in turn reduces the extremity of our thoughts and feelings that were blocking us from observing ourselves. So not trying to judge, not trying to control, nevertheless orchestrates some organization into our minds and bodies so that they're observable and ongoingly observed.
Thank you. And in the quote that I read to you, you make a distinction between not just mind and body, but mind, body, and emotions. How are mind and emotions different?
Well, when we say mind, it's an inexact word since uh, there's not a uniform agreement on what the mind actually is. Um, On the one hand, it's obvious, and on the other hand, it's hard to define. But generally, when we say mind, we're talking about our thoughts. For example, I'm thinking about what is homeostasis, and that's on my mind. But emotions are different. Emotions are things like fear, anger, hatred, passion, etc. And they can exist in a separate compartment from the mind. You can be thinking one thing and feeling something slightly different, or they can be, the mind and the emotions can be entraining each other. One follows the other. So when we think about something pleasant, we feel pleasant sensations, but they're not always the same thing. And observing your sensations when you're having strong emotions and thinking is different than observing your sensations when you're not having strong emotions and thinking. So you could see emotions as a component of mind, or you could see emotions as a separate mental arena. In fact, cognitions and emotions tend to run together, but do not always run together.
Thank you. From a neurological perspective, proper meditation practice activates the prefrontal cortex, leading to reduced arousal in the limbic system and amygdala. Can you please break down these neurological terms and processes and explain how they might contribute to the calming effects of meditation?
So when we're trying to focus, certain parts of our brain come into play. And when we're relaxing focus, other parts of our nervous system come into play. So in conscious thinking or focused thinking, brain areas take over and organize your attention so that it stays relatively constancy on the object you're trying to attend to. And this occurs in probably every mammal. Certainly it occurs in all primates, and it occurs in all people. As you concentrate, you bring mind into a certain order and you let go of other parts of the mind. Don't call upon them. And when you're sleepy or lazy or daydreaming or tired or just hanging out doing nothing much, the other parts of the mind that were not being called into play when you were focusing now emerge. Meditation starts with an act of focusing. So the first thing you do when you sit down to meditate is you start to activate and call upon the parts of the cortex, the superficial parts of the brain, and particularly the prefrontal cortex. That means the parts of the brain right below the forehead, where attention and ordering of focus and concentration is maintained in the brain. As you do that, you're reducing the activity in the other parts of the brain, and emotions, daydreaming, and other non-focused thoughts are in other parts of the brain, which you are now silencing because you're giving emphasis to concentration and attention, which calls up the prefrontal cortex. So the very moment you start meditating, you're reorganizing the way your brain is operating, giving emphasis to some areas and not to other areas.
And then, so what's happening in the limbic system and in the amygdala?
The limbic system and the amygdala are the areas that are associated with our emotions. I would like to say that all this science, biology, neurology, all of this is subject to new learning. We've learned so much about the so-called mind, whatever that is, the nervous system, the brain, our thinking, our feeling. We've learned so much about it. We're going to keep learning more about it over the upcoming days, years, centuries, hopefully. And so many of the things I say are based upon current science and subject to change. I think the most important fundamental thing we're discussing is that by meditating, we are more or less exercising some brain parts, and we're more or less de-emphasizing other brain parts. The amygdala is the source of very strong, powerful feelings like rage, anger, hatred, aggression. The goal of being a civilized person is to gain cognitive control over your amygdala, to be able to reduce its primitive force. But humans tend to require some of those feelings, even when they're relatively social, relatively civilized. And so concentrating alone does not entirely reduce amygdala activity, but it reduces it. The limbic system is the area that is, in contemporary neurology, is associated with all emotions, strong ones, weak ones, pleasant ones, unpleasant ones. It's not as constrained and potent as the amygdala. It's more diffuse. The limbic system means it consists of multiple brain parts. They are all also reduced as we concentrate and focus, and they're reduced, but they're not eliminated. When you stop concentrating, the restoration of the limbic system and amygdala will occur.
Are there other parts of the brain that that would benefit a meditator to know about? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So the modern view of the brain is a little harder to talk about than the way we're talking about things now, because everything is networked. So when you activate one part of the brain, even if you're trying to limit yourself, let's say to concentration, we all know perfectly well our concentration is imperfect. So in reality, what happens is we start concentrating in meditation. That activates the prefrontal cortex, that reduces the limbic system and amygdala. But within a second or 10 seconds or 15 seconds, our concentration begins to wander. And the other parts of the brain are once again restored to activity. So there's a networking, an interrelationship. Things are happening partly through our conscious volition, but partly without our conscious volition. And so the entire human being is networked behind our efforts to meditate. But some parts are more emphasized or given more power or require more sensitivity to and attunement with in order for us to be able to use them as we optimally want to use them when we meditate. Once again, the main lesson is that we can't meditate without our biological nature. And our biological nature is already set up to have the capacity to meditate because the tools that we need to meditate are already encoded into our whole body and mind.
Mm-hmm. And where would the default mode network fit into this?
There's a contemporary theory, and as I said, contemporary theories are what we have today. They may change tomorrow. There's a contemporary theory that the mind can be understood like an automobile that doesn't have park, it just has neutral. So when you start your car, you're already in neutral. And if you don't put it into first or second or third gear or reverse, it stays in neutral. It just hovers in neutral. It uses the least amount of gas. It doesn't propel your car forward. It takes very little energy, but the car stays on. It does not go out, does not die, hopefully. So there's a default mode network, probably or possibly, one way to describe, when we're just sitting there daydreaming. We're in a bus station waiting for a bus. We're waiting on a street corner for a friend to pick us up. They're driving over to where we're standing. And the mind is not particularly focused. We're not particularly feeling a strong emotion. We're not trying to solve a problem. We're just in idle. And that idle is the default mode where we're not trying to put ourselves in gear behind one mode. There's a default mode that automatically comes up and starts to keep the engine revving at a low speed using low amounts of energy. And it will continue to percolate along in that relatively resting, yet relatively alert, relatively activated, relatively inactivated phase. That's a resting mind. Is the mind in meditation similar to the default mode? There are some people who believe that is true. I don't think that's a very good description because I think as we meditate for longer periods of time, whole day at a time, whole week at a time, 4 weeks at a time, we find that the mind is actually doing many, many, many things. And meditation is a highly complex, networked process with many networks calling upon each other or reducing each other. So the default mode is probably involved, but it's not a description of what meditation is.
Mm. Well, then, would you say a challenge that many people face is they're hoping to have their minds in that idle state because it's maybe more restful, but and if they've just meditated for an hour or they've just followed an app, they might be in that idle, calming, restful place, but then, as you say, you meditate for longer periods of time, a week or 10 days or 4 weeks at a time. It doesn't always stay in that restful place, and then people get frustrated.
Yeah, I think that's a very good description. You could divide uh, the process or the goals of meditation somewhat arbitrarily into two different goals. One is to feel good right now. If you're in the default mode, maybe you'll feel good right now. But the other goal of meditation is to develop in personality and in character what we call walking the path, which is reorganizing who you are, how you think and feel, and what your lifestyle is like on the basis of meditation. And that reorganization requires not just feeling good at the expense of censoring out all other disturbing material. It means learning to feel well, even when the mind is tending to drift off into other problem sets like fear, anger, passion, etc. So if your goal is to meditate for 1 hour, you can feel good by being in the default mode. If your goal is to meditate for a lifetime, you can't possibly live in the default mode for a lifetime. You won't even be able to cook dinner that night. And so in order to live a life of meditation, that attachment to the comfort of the default mode has to be surrendered.
Mm. Yeah, well said. I think we need to tell that to people on day one of the free course. Can you talk about the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems and how meditation might be connected to these?
There's a line I use to explain these things to myself. It comes from a Beatles song, All You Need Is Love, which is sung by John Lennon. And the opening line of the song is, nothing you can do that can't be done. If we couldn't meditate, we wouldn't meditate. We can meditate because the body is already set up to do things somewhat like or exactly like meditation. We have systems in our brain, nervous system, and the attendant other parts of our bodies, like the endocrine system. We have setups that are ready to roll. They're pre-designed to do certain things. One of them you could call the sympathetic nervous system. These names are somewhat arbitrary. They're clusters of activity that tend to run together to do one thing. The sympathetic nervous system is intended to focus the animal, the mammal that we are, intensely upon an absolutely vitally important event. For example, if you're hunting, or, for example, if you're being hunted. When life requires us to be hyper-focused, ready to fight, ready to flee, the sympathetic nervous system, as a whole orchestrated phenomena, will come into play. And all at once, as we know if we've ever experienced intense fear, for example, your eyes dilate, your mouth goes dry, your heart rate goes up, your breathing goes up, your skin begins to tingle. An array of systems are called into play to make you ready to flee or go into combat. And we have a very opposite system, the parasympathetic system. It does more or less the opposite from the sympathetic system. That is, it puts us at rest. It makes us feel relatively sluggish. We feel not at all frightened, not at all in need of fleeing. We feel somewhat at home, somewhat curled up on our bed, somewhat at ease in the world. The idea of these pre-existing systems is that they were gradually built into us because they're so necessary and useful that people who had these systems tended to live better, tended to pass on their genes better than animals who lacked these systems. Now that we have evolved over long historical eras to have these, we can call them into play somewhat voluntarily. For example, you're sitting at home, you're doing nothing, you're in parasympathetic mode is activated, not much is happening in your mind and body. Maybe you're in the default mode as well, which goes along with the parasympathetic system. And then you turn on the 7th game of the World Series, or you turn on news of a war. Suddenly your sympathetic system will rise involuntarily to prepare you to deal with intense and frightening stimuli. The opposite can also happen. You're watching the 7th game of the World Series, or you're watching news of a war, and you decide it's too much for you, and you turn on Seinfeld or Donald Duck, in which case you are controlling your nervous system to reduce the levels of fear, the levels of focus, the levels of blood flow, the intensity of your heartbeat, and you're putting yourself back down, easing yourself back down. We can use all of these systems in meditation and partly gain conscious control over them. For example, when you sit down to meditate, you certainly don't want to be filled with fear, but you can focus yourself. And as you focus, there will be some activation of some of the sympathetic system. But you also want to relax yourself. As you do that, there will be some activation of the parasympathetic system. One way to think about meditation is the conscious person, our thinking selves, is learning a more subtle relationship to our body, such that we're more comfortable with more body systems, and we're more able to call up or to squash down certain aspects of our body's predispositional setup so that we become more conscious and more controlled people.
Great, thank you. Did you bring up the Beatles quote because you have your Beatles friends behind you?
No, that's one of the great quotes to think about.
Mm-hmm.
Meditation, I mean, it's something I love to think about, which is that we can meditate. Nothing you can do that can't be done. We can meditate. So that means over millions of years of evolution, these things developed inside of mammals. And what we're using is already present in us. So we're doing something that extends, that educates, that utilizes natural biological function, and we're calling it into further advancement, further consciousness. It reminds me of reading. People in the state of nature couldn't read, but they had the ability to see details, to utilize symbols, to think in abstract concepts. And so reading came into the human cultures. In the same way, meditation is something we have been born to do, but we can do it or not do it. But if we do it, we're using things that we're well prepared to do.
Great, thank you. In your essay, The Universal Features of Meditation, you referred to the brain's salient system. Before we go deeper into our investigation of the actual system, can you just explain what the salient system means?
Yeah, salience is a word that means something that feels powerful and meaningful to you. an example, every day there may be examples of salience in your life, but the common examples, for example, if someone believes deeply in their profession, they may feel it's very salient to them that when they go to work, their life feels engaged and meaningful and important. And that would be different than someone who feels their life is relatively meaningless and their job is just a routine procedure that doesn't involve them and doesn't interest them. So salience means the intensity and power of what you're thinking and feeling. And it also means your identification with it. You feel this is what I want to be doing and should be doing. Salience came into psychological language in the recent decades in relationship to the concept of addiction. When a person is addicted, they feel that a certain substance, say an addicting chemical, or a certain activity, say scrolling on their cell phone, they feel that is the only thing they want to do. Today we find many people, predominantly young, not only young, who are constantly feeling they should go back and look at their phone. No matter what else they're doing, that's the one thing they really want to be doing that really seems important. The big message of the day will come on their text in a minute, in another minute. Maybe it already came. Maybe they should look now. Maybe they shouldn't wait. And so salience becomes hyper focused on one activity. The person begins to lose interest in other activities. And that's what happens to the drug addict, the alcoholic, and the person who's obsessed. The
Mhm.
general theory used to be that addictions are the hyper salience of one item. The heroin addict only feels healthy, happy, and alive when they've taken heroin. But a different theory came into being, which is this, the addiction is not simply attachment to something, but it's also the reduction of the ability to feel any other feelings. So the addicted person feels, I don't want to do anything other than get to my texts and see who sent me that thing I've been waiting for. I don't want to do anything but shoot up heroin. I don't want to do anything but sit at home and read. So salience can become monosalience. The person loses their ability to feel salience in anything other than that singular activity. And we say of that person they're addicted, or we say they're obsessed, or we say they're a workaholic, or we say they're addicted to certain behaviors like their phone. The goal of meditation, however, is to feel alive, connected, aware, alert all the time. So when we're meditating, we're constantly practicing moving away from that compelling daydream, moving away from that strong attachment, moving away from that craving that comes up in our minds as we're meditating. And we try to move away from that back to the sensations of the body, which are responding to many other things. And we become aware of that if we keep our body sensations in our awareness. If we lose awareness of our body sensations, we can once again submerge behind one strong craving, one strong daydream, one strong wish. So meditation is a practice of multi-salience, and in theory, we hope it should reduce monosalient activities like addiction.
So would multi-salience be a goal of meditation, or would it just be a natural outcome of proper meditation?
Natural, yeah.
Hmm.
A healthy person in general should have multi-salience. That is
Hmm.
to say, they should feel alive and well doing many things. So meditation wouldn't be unique, but it seems quite set up to help with this issue.
And can you speak about how meditation might help restore a sense of multi-salience, and really counter, more specifically, the effects of these addictive behaviors and thought patterns?
Sure. Let's say, uh, let's say I've been caught up in some news stories or some chatter with friends or some chatter with enemies, some site that I'm following on some internet-based device, and I become more and more obsessed with this. And then the time comes, and now I'm going off to my 10-day Vipassana course. First thing that happens when I sit down is I'm obsessed with this site. Who has sent a text to it, or what emails have arisen, or have those idiots who I disagree with, have they taken over, or are they winning the argument? Or have my friends sent a brilliant, concise answer to the enemies? And that I'm sitting there on the beginning of my 10-day course, worried with these things, preoccupied with these things, feeling that the center of my life, that the only thing that's important to me now is for my side to win. That's a classic example of the kind of monosalience we will bring to our meditation course. Then on the course, my mind is constantly driven back to this one thing over and over, usually a very limiting thing, a very minimal statement about what my life is really about, an obsession, a monosalient preoccupation. But then I try to meditate. I keep trying to call my attention back to my entire body. My entire body is filled with sensations. All the brain is potentially activated through body sites. All the body is potentially activated through brain sites. They're integrated. They both are connected to each other. As I meditate on sensations, I'm calling into activity my whole body and my whole mind, not just the parts that are involved with my monosalient obsession. Therefore, in meditation, we're directing our mind to move away from that idea, that dream, that image, that fantasy, that self-important narrative that's running wild in our mind. And we're calling our mind back to awareness of our entire being, our whole body, all its sensations. So we're practicing restoring a full set of aware activities at the same time that we're calling it away from that one preoccupation.
Great, thank you. It's very helpful. I adore your analogy of meditation as a neurobiological fractal to describe its ability to generate both order and elaborate patterns of mental life. So this is a two-part question for you. So first, can you elaborate on the analogy? And second, how does the concept of a fractal, which is an infinitely complex pattern that repeats itself at every scale, help us understand the paradoxical nature of meditation and its impact on the brain?
One of the puzzling things about meditation that everyone feels when they come to their first course and maybe their 50th course, and that Goenkaji refers to frequently in meditation is, what am I doing? Have I gone mad? It's such a simple-minded intention. All you're doing is trying to observe your body sensations and not react. That's the whole story. And you're doing this over and over. And as you're learning this, there's a natural doubt that arises in the mind. It says, how can something so limited, so confined, so repetitive be valuable? We just heard a talk about how monosalience isn't good. And the next thing we're hearing is that meditation seems to be focusing you in one way over and over and over. And that seems monosalient. So what am I doing? There's a paradox that seems to lie at the basis of meditation. I was looking around for a way of explaining this to myself, and hopefully a way of explaining it to other people that might be useful to some people. Particularly, I'm looking at those explanations that already exist in a scientific worldview that also may pertain to meditation. So this thing called a fractal is a phenomenon in nature. We find it through many parts of nature, in which a pattern repeats in many sizes and many scales And every repetition has two components. It's the same thing over and over, and it's different every time. So it's called self-similar. It's similar to itself over and over and over, yet it's never the same. There's infinite variation in the same pattern, but the pattern is always varying, yet self-similar. Hey, that sounds a lot like what I'm doing when I meditate. I'm doing the same thing over and over. I'm trying to be aware of my sensations and not react to them. And thousands, hundreds of thousands of different thoughts, feelings, emotions, ideas cross my mind while I'm meditating on these sensations. It's self-similar. It's always done with the basis of body sensations. And it's infinitely variable. Every time you do it, second to second, it's different than it was the second before. It's different than the last hour you meditated. It's different than the last meditation course you took, and it's always different. So it seems to me that the way that the Buddha learned to use his mind when he was figuring out how to practice Vipassana meditation, he was discovering a fractal-like property of the human mind in which self-similarity can vary infinitely yet retain its core similarity. And that's the way I understand meditation.
Great, thank you. So in trying to understand that, I'm trying to get my head around the fractal. So just as each part of a fractal pattern contains a miniature version of the whole, could we say that each moment of mindfulness, each moment of awareness and insight is actually also giving us a glimpse into the larger structure of the path and leading us towards greater clarity
Yeah,
and understanding?
I think that's beautifully put. So um, when we're meditating and we're, let's say, somewhat concentrated, not perfectly concentrated, sticking with awareness of sensations most of the time, pretty good concentration, drifting off only a bit, coming back relatively quickly, then in those kinds of states, which many people can access fairly soon in their path of meditation, those states are based upon our understanding, our realization, our grokking, our taking into us as a whole the awareness of anicca in everything, in our mind, in our body, in all our sensations. And that also becomes awareness of anicca as the fundamental principle of our life. We're born, we're around for a while, we homeostatically regulate to keep ourselves together 70 years, 80 years, 90 years, and then homeostatic regulation breaks down, we can't self-regulate, and we pass away. That understanding of anicca is the core window through which we're looking into reality as we learn to meditate. And in those moments that we're approaching a full awareness, a full self-integration with anicca, we're opening a glimpse into a different way of understanding ourselves and the world. And all those moments, as different as they may be in the way our mind is slightly being distracted or slightly thinking about something else, there's all that variety going on. And yet there's the self-similar repetition. This is all anicca.
Mhm. Wow, thank you. You invoke an ancient Indian perspective on meditation as a process that alters the vibratory tone within the individual. How do you reconcile this traditional understanding with contemporary scientific perspectives on meditation? And can you explain how the concept of vibration, which, while seemingly abstract, could be connected to the physical and neurological processes involved in meditation?
Very hard question. One of the problems with the question is it goes in a different direction than I usually think. So my thinking is often organized in terms of taking an understanding of meditation and giving it the language of our era, our times, our educational levels, so that meditation makes sense in the context of our culture, even though it was developed in a culture far away a long time ago. But now you're taking us back in the other direction, trying to integrate my use of a phrase from a classic old days description about meditation and trying to see if that can be integrated with our contemporary way of thinking. So
Part
here's
of the fractal.
yeah, here's a way of thinking about it. Um, and lately, there's been a huge interest in J. Robert Oppenheimer because of the movie about Oppenheimer and because the work he did is still one of the most relevant and dangerous aspects of life on modern Earth, creation of nuclear weapons. So Oppenheimer was very smart, and he had most of his friends were Nobel laureates. He never got the Nobel Prize, but his closest friend was Isidore Rabi, who refused to work on the nuclear weapons project, though he did consult sometimes to it, and instead started playing around with vibrations in the body. His interest was the way that nuclei inside of atoms can be changed in the way they vibrate. He sent magnetic waves through atoms and watched how that altered the activity in atomic nuclei. For this, he got the Nobel Prize. It's called uh, nuclear magnetic resonance imaging. It's used probably in every hospital in the world today, or in every hospital district. There's at least one MRI machine. Now there's different kinds of MRIs also. Um, so this is an example of how the idea of vibration, the fact that a body can be lined up along different vibratory tones, may well be a deeply scientific idea. It's an idea that we as meditators gather from the traditional descriptions of meditation, but it seems to fit very well with our understanding that atoms are actually vibratory systems, and without altering them so much that they're destroyed and explode like in a nuclear explosion, instead we can alter the resonance of atoms very slightly, and that may give us meaningful information about the person. But we alter the resonance only to a limited degree, and we alter it in a way that doesn't destroy it. And so it seems that this may well be happening all the time inside of our bodies. Different zones, different arenas of one part of life will influence the vibratory tone of other parts of life. If we stand near a magnet, our vibratory tone changes. That's the MRI machine. But this may be going on through many other examples. For example, what about an air polluted environment? What about an environment of intense fear? What about an environment of intense comfort? We're not only changing our brain, our thoughts, our emotions, our amygdala, our limbic system, we may also be changing our atoms. Maybe. Everything I'm saying is with a maybe. And I think it's an interesting way of understanding the various changes that we feel our body going through. When you're meditating and you have more uniform, free flow type of sensations, what's going on? Why are they all hooked up together, or it seems they're hooked up together, or they seem to flow together, or they seem to be similar in type? Is it possible that our vibrations are altering and moving in a stream that meditation is now aligning them into? I'll leave it as a question.
All right, you're asking me a question?
No, I say I leave it as a question.
Oh, you leave it as a question.
Rather than saying this is a fact or this I know, I'm saying, well, this is one description that makes sense to me that's different than it's a fact.
Mm-hmm. Good. I appreciate more questions than answers. Um, you both praise and challenge the notion of a mind-body integration. Can you explain this seeming contradiction in your writing?
Mind-body integration is a relatively newer development in Western medicine and science. It's said everywhere. Most people who study science are aware that the original European view of the human being was a mind and a body, two separate things joined together. But that the view changed over time, and in the last generation, the dominant view has become the mind is part of the body. It's not a separate thing, it's an aspect of the body, and the mind and body are an entity or one thing. Well, that's a little abstract and distant from our meditation experience. But one of the advantages of mind-body thinking is that it may well be that by changing your thoughts or your emotions or both, you may influence your health or your disease states, mind and body being an identity. And the opposite may also be true, that by influencing your body, you may influence your mind. For example, if you're a meditator and you're not particularly healthy or physically fit, possibly doing some exercises that may help you be healthier will also help your mental state. Conversely, learning how to have a more positive mental state, a less negative mental state through meditation may influence the health of your body. So mind-body integration is an important idea. It's an idea that can be helpful to people with mental problems. By helping their body, they can help their mental problems, or it can help people with physical problems. By helping their mind, they might help their body. But it's very limited and it's greatly exaggerated and overstated in certain kinds of uh, biomedical thinking today. The exaggeration can be seen as follows. You live a very healthy life. Maybe you're a highly attained meditator. Maybe you're the Buddha himself. You still die. Your mind cannot control your body. Your body has its own life. No matter how positive you are, you disappear. The mind and body are partly integrated. They influence each other. They don't dominate or control each other. You can be a mentally healthy person and get a fatal disease. You can be a sick person and develop positive ways of thinking and feeling. Possibly meditation may help you, even if you're physically sick. It may not eradicate the physical sickness. It almost certainly won't, but it may help you live with it. So the concept of mind and body integration can be very helpful, and it can be misleading, and it can lead to fantasy solutions that leads to the false hope that meditation will lead to perfect health, or that perfect health will make meditation easy.
Thank you. I think we saw this um, fantasy get played out in many circles during the COVID pandemic.
Good point. Yeah.
You mentioned the scientific understanding of the human body as being formed from matter and energy from the earth and the sun. How might this perspective inform our understanding of our interrelationship to all life?
So those are the kinds of thoughts that are very important and helpful to me. Going back again to like my first Vipassana course, which shares similarity, it's self-similar to many people's first Vipassana courses. And I'm thinking, what is this? How could this be true? How does this relate to things I studied for 11 years and the biomedical education I had? And when the teaching from Goenkaji's discourses and his uh, advice on how to practice in the next hour, when that began to come into focus and I could concentrate on it and actually understand, at the level of my own body, what he was talking about, it clicked with great salience to me that what we're talking about is the atomic, material, energetic creation of our bodies out of the materials and energies of the universe. We're a collection of things held together electrostatically, filled with the energy of the food we eat, which is energy that comes from the sun. All our food has energy that comes from the sun. So we capture energy from the sun in food substances. We eat those substances. We get their atoms and their energy. We're a part of the universe, literally, factually, scientifically. And therefore, the practice and the understanding of our practice of Vipassana is very deeply consonant, deeply embedded in our understanding today of what nature and the planet are put together with. One of the things that's most interesting to me is just an image. It helps me keep my mind on the deep meanings of Vipassana at the level of my mind. That's different than the level of practice, in which the only practice is the practice. But if you have a mind that when you stop meditating, always wants to review what was going on. Did that make sense? Am I doing something meaningful? Should I pursue this activity? I want that evaluative capacity in my mind as well. And the evaluative capacity is thinking, when the Big Bang started, there was no matter at all. It was so hot and dense that nothing had thingness to it. It was all, you could say, heat, vibration, waves, energy. And gradually matter appeared. The first things that appeared were simple atoms. The simplest atoms are hydrogen atoms. Some of the hydrogen atoms formed at the beginning of the era that we call the universe, our universe. Some of those hydrogen atoms are in me. They've been floating around for approximately 14 billion years. They're circling through my body. They'll leave my body and circle around through something else. So my body is formed out of the universe, and the anicca, the constant change, the constant adding new atoms, taking away new atoms, eating food, incorporating the food, sloughing off the food when my skin gets old. All of those processes are universal processes going on in the universe all the time, and they're going on in my body all the time. My body is following the laws of the universe. That ability to make sense out of what we're practicing when we do Vipassana is very encouraging and comforting to me.
So we might share atoms, but if we look at a bigger picture, might we have shared atoms with the Buddha?
Yes, there's a cosmologist, a person who studies the nature of the whole cosmos, who has said that if you take the number of atoms in a human body, there is a huge, gigantic number. It's a number we can't even understand. It's much bigger than trillions. We have many, many atoms. So there's so many that they can be dispersed for long times over many places. And still, you've got enough atoms to go around. And so, yes, the answer is, in theory, it's not only possible, it's probable that there are some atoms from the body of the Buddha that are in you and in me.
Mm-hmm.
Actually counting that, of course, is not really possible.
Yeah. And I'm curious, how might this understanding of the interrelationship of these atoms and the sharing of atoms, how might that, or how might that influence our perspective on the environment or on nature?
Well, I would hope that anybody who understands either modern scientific cosmology or Vipassana, because I've tried to be showing that they're pointing us in the same direction. Anybody who understands that realizes that everything we put into the environment is going to potentially come back into us. Everything we are calls upon the environment around us, picks up the material and the energies that form us. And therefore, every time we're spraying the world around us with plastic bags and aerosols and unwanted chemicals and things that don't decay with time. We're potentially putting that into our own body.
That's food for thought. And this also, I mean, thinking about this interrelationship and trying to connect it to the fractal example. For me, when I also think about the fractal, I see how the fractal emphasizes this idea of interrelatedness, as it shows how each moment of awareness is also linked to the larger context of one's life and practice. And it's also a teaching on how all things arise in dependence upon conditions and are intimately connected. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Sure. It's again like one of the things that was so evocative and powerful about Goenkaji's role in modern era of history is his attempt to make the traditional presentation of Vipassana compatible with modern science. And as has been pointed out to me, Goenkaji's teachers also had similar agendas. They wanted Vipassana to emerge from just one country, just one group of people, and be available to the planet. And to do that, the scientific worldview had to be brought alongside of and compared to Vipassana. So this integrated world, when Goenkaji uses the phrase the laws of nature, that's the moment where these two spheres of historical thinking, say Vipassana practice and the scientific worldview, come together. So the integration, the thing that holds together the Big Bang in my body, or the Buddha's atoms in my atoms, or the world 1 million light years away and the world right here in my office. The thing that holds all of it together are the basic laws of nature, which are guiding all these processes. We're all products of the same processes. We're products of the same laws. We are outflows of the same fundamental conditions. So it's natural that our meditation should lead us to insights about the whole system as well.
Mm-hmm. So the insights coming from our meditation are, would you say they're also interrelated with everything else that's happening, whether it's on a mental level or on an atomic level?
I would think so. I would think the law of anicca, the law of change, the law of transformation. There's a famous quote, I've quoted it frequently, but to repeat it, I think it's in Vipassana meditation, the scientific worldview also. But Einstein was the person most aware of the fact that scientific laws change because we think we're getting to the bedrock of science. We think we found a law that will never change. And then another scientist comes along and finds another law that no one knew about before. And so we have a new law of nature. Nature didn't change, but our perception of it changed. And that's how, for example, magnetic resonance imaging was discovered. A new scientist came along with new insights. But Einstein said one law is never going to change. No one will ever find that it's wrong. It's immutable. And that's the law of change, transformation, anicca. Everything is in motion, becoming something that it wasn't a minute ago. That will never change.
Mm-hmm.
That's Einstein's view.
Mm-hmm. The only thing that's constant is change. So, for my last question, in the essay, Our Best and Most Lasting Gift, you seek to find biological and neurological common ground with other meditation traditions. From your perspective, what is the value of doing so?
There's a strong force that impels the meditator to get married to their meditation. That means to make a commitment until death do us part. This is the way I'm going to practice. Of course, a commitment like that shouldn't be made trivially, shouldn't be made hastily, it shouldn't be made impulsively. It's not a matter of belief that I believe in this. It's a matter of incorporation, that this becomes part of one's life. It's kind of like speaking a language. I can't speak to you in English and figure out what grammar I'm saying as I'm saying it. The grammar has to become automatic so that I can conceptualize as I'm talking and not think about the grammar as I'm talking. And in meditation, we want to have the ability to sit down and start meditating and keep meditating, meditating for the day, the week, the year, the lifetime. And it needs to be that well practiced, well rehearsed, well familiar with us. So it's important that we cleave to one way of practicing. But that doesn't mean we should ignore or argue with or castigate people who meditate differently. It just means, just like we marry one person, but we don't say everyone else's marriage is no good. We just say, I married in this way. Other people married in other ways, not condemning them. So I think it's interesting and important to know what is the basis of meditations of many kinds at the neurobiological, psychological, cultural level, because it helps us feel the value of what we're doing, understand how we're doing, what we're doing, and why we're doing it by getting a comparison, not a condemning comparison, just an awareness of what we're doing. Certain things will stand out in our minds if we see they're missing or different in another system. And in addition, it will help us root ourselves in this biological, medical, scientific understanding, which I think is what will help modern minds grasp the full value of meditation. So if we find out that any calm or peaceful state, for example, may activate the parasympathetic nervous system, that's of interest and may help us deal with some problems that come up in meditation, help us be more skillful teachers of and practitioners of meditation. So finding a universal basis of many practices in the way we practice will help us value those practices. One example that I feel comes out very strongly when we compare the traditions as they were taught in Asia, for example, the way we're learning Vipassana from its Asian traditional sources, and compare that to the way meditation is commonly described in the modern West. In the modern West, you see a magazine cover, and there's a young, healthy-looking person looking pretty good, usually in some stretchy, elastic clothing, and they're meditating. And then there's a chapter heading or a article that says using your nervous system the way the Buddha used his nervous system, or tuning up your mind or tuning up your brain to this other form of meditation. But in our tradition, it's very important to remember that we have two other arenas that are influencing our meditation all the time when we meditate, not just the neurobiological, which we focused on in this conversation today, but what we focused on in the previous conversation, which is that we are strongly influenced by cultural values and we're strongly influenced by a society. So the cultural values are things like non-harmfulness. We're not just practicing calm and peace. We're practicing a value system, a way of life, a path. And it includes values that are added in by the Buddha at the founding moments to what makes meditation work. That's not in a person sitting still alone on a cushion. That's in the history of meditation. If you're not partaking of the history of meditation, you're losing some of its most salience-inducing practices, like non-harmfulness. Similarly, we're participating in a society. Since our Vipassana tradition has no money. It's always impoverished. It has no grants. It is always getting its renewed energy from its practitioners. And its practitioners are the actual motor, the actual force that keeps Vipassana rotating in the world. And so we're aligned with, participating with, joined to, members of, participants within a tradition. That's different than one person sitting alone on their cushion. So it's important for us to know where our tradition comes from, why we embrace it, where its active ingredients lie. The active ingredients of the Vipassana we practice do lie in the nervous system. They do lie in our atoms. They do lie in our brains and our bodies, but they also lie in cultural values and friendship on the path of our community.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that. Is there anything else you'd like to discuss about the neurobiological dimensions of the practice before I begin reading questions from the audience?
No, I think we've done it.
Great. So thank you. And now we'll take questions from the audience.
Okay, thank you.
So the first question I have here is the person asks, modern medicine, especially psychiatry, seem to rely on the belief that mental illness or distress is the result of a chemical imbalance. And the answer is the right combination of pharmaceuticals. Can you comment on this model and how it relates to your comments regarding homeostasis? Is there a point where a human being is not able to self-regulate? Are people on medication for mental illness able to meditate, including taking a 10-day course?
Very wonderful question and very appropriate to the lives of many people. So, psychiatry is not a uniform entity. If we go to different departments of psychiatry around the world or just in the United States, we'll find different concepts, different practices ascendant in one place and not ascendant in another place where something different is ascendant. Or if we talk to 10 different psychiatrists located in any one place, 10 psychiatrists in LA, 10 psychiatrists in New York, we'll find a lot of different opinions and a lot of different attitudes. So this question starts with a very important observation. There's a strong paradigm in Western world psychiatry to see mental illness as a chemical imbalance. And that paradigm is the predominant paradigm, but it's by no means the only one. I personally do not believe in that. I believe chemical imbalances are often very important, very troubling. Some people are haunted by chemical imbalances. Some people have chemical imbalances that are induced by their environment or their lifestyle. And some people with mental illness have no chemical imbalance at all. They have other kinds of problems and imbalances. Just before we shifted to our question and answer session, in the last things I was talking about in answer to you, Kory, I was discussing how important cultural values are, how important social situations are, how important friendships are. We could add that into families, etc. So a person can be suffering from mental illness due to chemical imbalance or not due to chemical imbalance, due to partial chemical imbalance, interacting with culture or not. We do know that issues like race, poverty, and the general health of the environment, air pollution, all contribute to mental illness. So mental illness is not a uniform entity. It has multiple causes and therefore also has multiple treatments, which will be varyingly effective. A treatment has to be matched to the cause in that individual. Many individuals, however, do have chemical imbalances. I'm not saying they're not there. I'm saying our modern Western medical paradigm overemphasizes them. That doesn't mean it's always wrong. So people can benefit from many things and not benefit from many things. If a person has lost their ability to regulate their mind and body and has lost that ability to a very extreme degree, we call that mental illness. And that shows why mental illness can be extremely dangerous, even life-threatening, certainly life-withering. Because, as I said when I was talking about homeostasis at the beginning of today's conversation, it's the key to life. It's the essence of life. So a person who's losing homeostatic regulation is losing life. But I also said that there's many, many thousands of homeostatic regulators. So you can be losing many of them, but still have many of them intact. So there's no one exact thing called mental illness. There's no one exact thing called treatment of mental illness. And there's no one exact interaction between meditation and mental illness. Therefore, I've encouraged our tradition. I hope our tradition embraces, I hope every course site in Vipassana embraces the idea of individual assessment. Every one of us is different than everyone else. In fact, every one of us is different than who we were last week, last year, 10 years ago. So the relevance of meditation to a person who's in some distress, it has no singular answer, and it requires individuated assessment of the causes of that illness, the intensity of that illness, and the treatments that may or may not be relevant to it. Vipassana is not intended as a treatment for mental illness. That's not why it exists. That's not why it's practiced. It may well help some people, and it may well not help some people. And as the questioner seemed to imply, yes, it's true that some people are dysregulated to the point that when they sit down on a cushion, they won't be able to practice Vipassana. It's like asking a man with a broken leg to go into a sprint and join the track team. Let's wait until his leg is better before he joins the track team. So I hope that answers that question.
Sure, thank you. And this question is along similar lines. Somebody's asking about meditation when the body's feeling ill from a cancer or medications like chemotherapy.
Again, similar, we'd have to individuate this case, look at it specifically rather than make a general answer. If someone comes up to me and says, I was diagnosed with cancer 5 months ago, I'm now going through intense chemo and radiation, feel quite sick, nauseous, still have quite a bit of pain, but I'd like to learn to meditate. I'd say, this is not a good time to go away from home to a 10-day Vipassana site where the meals are regulated in time and what they consist of, your access to your family or to your doctor is diminished. It sounds like you're in a rough patch and you should wait until you're healthier. But if someone says to me, I've been a meditator for the past years, I've gone to several or more than several Vipassana courses, and I have now been diagnosed with cancer and I have to start taking all this very distressing treatments, chemotherapy, radiation, etc. Can I continue to meditate? I'd say, I think it would be really noble and I'd be inspired to hear if you were able to do that. You might be using your meditation to remember impermanence of this situation, to remember impermanence of each pain and difficulty you suffer, and to keep in mind that this whole situation is destined to change, and you will be gradually changing, hopefully emerging, maybe not emerging, but changing from this situation. It sounds like if you can do it, Vipassana would be a very wonderful companion on this difficult path you're now facing.
Great, thanks. So the next question somebody asks is, what is the significance of left brain versus right brain during meditation? Do we downplay one over the other? Is this dichotomy relevant at all during meditation?
I think the relevance is that as we meditate, we were discussing initially, we start using one part of our brain predominantly. and that's the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that helps us concentrate and focus. And we call it up right away. We sit down and we're taught, now we're going to concentrate and focus. And that part of our brain gets predominantly activated. But one of the differences in our school of Vipassana is that we don't do that for 10 minutes or an hour. We take a 10-day course, and over the course of 10 days, what we learn is, man, our brains are wildly changing all the time. Sometimes they're under our control. Sometimes they're not under our control. Sometimes they're partly under our control. Sometimes we're daydreaming. Sometimes we're angry. Sometimes we're sad. Sometimes we're hungry. Sometimes we're sleepy. And we're trying to meditate through all of that. And meditation is the process of using all the brain, the whole brain. And that goes back to that multi-salience, the richness of the use of the brain during Vipassana. So I would say, in terms of left and right brain, I believe that one of the features of a meditator's life is reducing that segmentation of the mind and integrating the mind with all its parts. So I would be guessing. I say guessing because I'm not going to accept scientific data based upon one school of meditation or one little group of meditators of 100 people who were in a study. But I would be guessing that the left-right brain dichotomy would be diminished. And I like to feel that when I'm hanging out with meditators, I feel people who have a more whole brain.
Good, thank you. Here's a question connected to salience, since you just brought it up. This person asks, can meditation lead to monosalience to meditation itself?
What a question. This is the kind of question you're always asking me, Kory. It goes to something I've said and shows that maybe there's a hole in it. Yes, I think there's a reason to worry that some individuals take meditation the wrong way and turn it into a monosalient obsession, which diminishes their life rather than expands it, which focuses them on one thing rather than on the manyness of the world. One of the when I became interested in meditation just through intellectual studies in college, and I hoped someday I could get to India and learn meditation. And then I did get to India and had some very brief, superficial meditation teachings and experiences, and I decided that was great, but it wasn't enough. I have to go back. And on that second trip to India, where Susan and I traveled together, we came upon Goenkaji. And the most confidence-building feature to me about Goenkaji was he was a fully engaged, fully alive, not monosalient individual. He was a married man, a father, a grandfather, a businessman, a friend, a traveler, a very competent, realistic participant in life. He was not monosalient. But I do believe there are places where people are encouraged to become monosalient through meditation. That would not be for me, and it would not be a system I'd like to participate in. It would not be a tradition I'd like to join. And when we find it in our tradition, we're encouraged to encourage that person to emerge. And one of the wonderful features of our tradition is the emphasis on service. If you're obsessed with meditation, you're not a part of Goenkaji's tradition. His saying was, if a person sits and doesn't serve, then they're not getting anything out of their sitting. Because what you get out of your sitting is the volition to serve. And service means engaging other people, helping the world find meditation sites, places, courses, and people. So hopefully we're not doing that. But yes, I think it's a danger. It's a very good point.
So this question here, the person is asking for some clarification about the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems that you spoke about. And the question is, does meditation stimulate both the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems? I thought that it would calm, it being meditation. I thought meditation would calm the sympathetic system.
Yeah, excellent point. In a short form, I'd say your thought, I'm speaking to this questioner, in a short form, I say your understanding is correct, but there is a complication. So these systems were first described quite a long time ago. Let's say 50 years ago when I was in medical school, parasympathetic, sympathetic systems were already old news. And as time has progressed, I mentioned earlier in this conversation today, our modern understanding of biology doesn't emphasize individual systems. It emphasizes networked systems. All the systems are, you could say, talking to each other, interacting with each other. We have a richer sense of everything in the mind and body connecting with and talking to everything else in the mind and body. That's why, for example, I think the left brain, right brain distinction is diminished as those aspects of our minds or aspects of the neurology of our minds integrate with and talk with each other and become more available to each other. And so the same is true with the sympathetic and parasympathetic. If you simply reduced the sympathetic system, you're never aroused, you're never frightened, you're never ready to fight or flee. That sounds pretty nice, but it's very unrealistic. How do you cross the street in New York or Mumbai if you don't have an active sympathetic system? How do you deal with situations at work or even situations at home, even situations at home with the closest members of your life and family, if you can't bring to the fore a certain amount of energy, strength, focus, determination, things that go along with the sympathetic system? So I would say the overuse of the sympathetic system is one of the sources of the stress in the modern world. But imagining that you should squash it completely goes against the very idea of the polysalient, engaged, multifaceted, multi-brain area life of the integrated, networked, meditative personality.
Thank you. So the next question, the person asks if there's any research showing a relationship between DNA and meditation.
Well, the research world about meditation is somewhat at an angle. It doesn't directly apply to Vipassana frequently because Vipassana meditators are fewer than meditators. They're harder to find in studies. So when you look at studies on meditation, very likely you're looking at something other than Vipassana. One of the important features of DNA is that we inherit it as an entity, but as we live with the DNA in our cells, the DNA is subtly altered. That's called epigenetics, the impact of the way we live and our environment upon the fundamental bedrock of who we are in our DNA. Many, many things change DNA. Strong emotions that we go through, strong physiological events like illnesses that we go through, viruses that attack us, all may have an epigenetic effect. Epigenetic means they affect the gene from the outside. It seems to me very probable that meditation has an epigenetic effect because it has such a strong effect that it's quite possible that it's reaching that deep into who we are. But is there any evidence that I know for that regarding Vipassana? No.
Doesn't epigenetic also refer to intergenerational?
Well, epigenetic means changes in the gene. So there used to be two schools of thought. One was the gene never changes, and the other is life changes the gene. And now those two schools have melded, and we know that most of the gene, most of the time, is quite constant and not very responsive to change, but that's not entirely true, and there are changes that do occur. So the changes can occur across generations. For example, the issues of starvation during warfare. People who starve during warfare, that starvation may show up in dietary and health patterns in the next generation that wasn't even involved with the event of starvation. But epigenetics does not always refer to cross-generational events, no.
Mhm. So the next person asks, the next question is, how does empathy, gratitude, and compassion fit in with meditation and our brain?
Wonderful question. When we meditate, one of our uh, directions, one of the lines that lead into the direction of nibbana, let's say, we'll give a very colloquial Western attitude towards nibbana and say a very wise and giving life. One of the lines that lead in that direction are the cultivation of the virtues that this questioner is referring to, such as gratitude. When these are practiced, both intentionally and unintentionally, they are practiced with the basis of the brain and the body. Nothing you can do that can't be done. If you couldn't do it in your brain and body, you couldn't do it. So let's say a person is practicing gratitude. I said volitionally and avolitionally. The way we practice gratitude volitionally is that when we learn this is going to help us, this is a parami, say a virtue, a skillful use of our life that helps other people and helps us, and we practice it, we are cultivating this state of mind in our brain. And what does this state of mind consist of? Well, we don't know exactly. We can't take an emotion and say exactly what it is in our brains, but we can make a reasonably educated guess that the cultivation of gratitude is affecting your limbic system, for example, the area of your emotions. When you're feeling gratitude, it's very hard to be angry or rageful. Therefore, we're affecting the amygdala, which is the source of things like rage and aggression. So we're doing something that is altering our brain. It happens if we practice it with intention. But lots of times, maybe all the time, people who meditate seriously find these virtues start bubbling up on their own. A person that goes to a Vipassana course in a state of kind of modern American life is pissed and irritated and not in a very good mood. And at the end of 11th day morning, they're feeling enormous gratitude, and they didn't practice it. They didn't cultivate it. It just welled up. Looks to me like something in their brain has changed. Now in this conversation, we've focused a lot on the structures of the brain, but the brain is flowing with different chemicals. And I would suggest to this questioner to think about the chemical flows that are alive in the brain in different emotional states. So we're not only changing the limbic system and the amygdala, we're changing the amount of neurotransmitters that are carrying these emotions in our brain and in our bodies. So it seems to me that there's a basis in the brain and body for these benighted, harmy virtues, good mental states. And the more they develop, the more our brain will respond to that development with better skills at doing that. The more you practice baseball, the better you get. The more you practice gratitude, the better you get.
Good, thank you. That's very helpful. This person asks, how would you describe or define the term energy?
Oh, well, energy is a term from physics, and it's a fundamental feature of the universe. It's in a very nitty-gritty kind of physics way, it's described as the ability to do work. And the work is described, for example, moving a stone from one place to another place, moving a planet from one place to another place, sending out cosmic rays. So in the basic physics of the universe, there's something called energy. And energy has its common forms that we're used to. We put gasoline in the car and it goes forward, or we plug in our car to an electric outlet, it gets energy, and the car can go forward. But energy may have kinds we don't know about, say dark energy, which is one of the great important waiting mysteries of the universe. We know there is such a thing. We don't know exactly what it is. So there are different kinds of energy. But in terms of our lives and our bodies, physical energy comes from the sun. We eat things, and that's how we get our energy. And the things we eat are all derived from the sun. We eat plants, they get their energy from the sun. Some people eat animals, and those animals have gotten their energy by eating plants. But the energy that we feel in our bodies is not a direct measure of the physics of the solar derived energy. We also have ways that that energy can feel confined and unavailable to us, or it can feel loose, easy, available to us. That goes along with our moods. So energy is sometimes a term that misleads people who feel they're so-called working with energy, and that's a way of not observing the reality of the actual physics of the sensations of our body, which are based upon the way we perceive the motion of anicca, of particles moving in our body. A person who imagines they're feeling that energy is imagining. They're not sensing. They're not aware of the real thing. But energy is real, and it is the way things move in our body. But energy alone is not what we feel. What we feel is the way that the particles in our body are being propelled by energy. That's the source of sensations.
Good. What is the value in studying the scientific aspects of Vipassana? Does it help us develop our practice more deeply?
Well, for some people, there's no value at all. In our tradition, if you're totally illiterate, never been to school, don't know a thing about science, you can practice just as well as anybody else. There's no need to be an intellectual if you're a Vipassana meditator. But in the world today, our Vipassana community is very predominantly consists of educated people. And in America, where I live, and in the people I get to meet and talk with in the meditation community, almost everyone is educated. And so the value or importance of putting Vipassana experience into Western conceptual scientific language is that first, most of us go to school and study something that gives us the scientific worldview. Even if you're a humanist, you're reading English as your focus in university, you're still exposed to the scientific worldview. Everybody in high school is in most of the countries of the world, including the Eastern countries, India, China, etc. And so we have in us these concepts that come from the Western world of science. And suddenly we're exposed to Vipassana, and it's taught in terms of concepts that come from ancient India. And so to make our practice feel more, that it makes more sense, that it actually isn't outmoded, that it isn't archaic or useless in the modern context. I want to, and many people want to, be able to understand it in the terms that we've learned in school. And so that's the value. In the actual practice of meditation, it has no place.
Mhm. Good. And we'll just finish off with one more question. And something we had discussed earlier, we see that several academic institutions like Madison, Wisconsin, and Stanford, and the University of Montreal, we see the brains of meditators being studied with EEG machines and things like this. Um, is there anything, but we don't see too many Vipassana meditators being studied. Can you comment on this?
Sure. The problem with those studies is a problem in science. It's called sample selection. So when you select the people to study, let's say you want to study meditators and you're going to study their brain, and that seems like an interesting scientific question. I'm certainly not against it. But you're selected people who are meditating. Well, the people who go to a meditation course are not average. They're people who are interested in meditation. And the effect you get when you study those people is the effect of their pre-existing personality and of the meditation. But their pre-existing personality surely is not random. Only certain kinds of people really get interested in meditation. So you never get a study of that kind if you're just taking meditators and studying their brain. You don't know whether you're getting the effect of who they used to be before they meditated or the effect of what happened to them during meditation. The only way to overcome that is you take a group of people who don't meditate and you train some of them to meditate and you don't allow others of them to meditate, and then you compare their brains and you know that the difference is due to meditation, not due to their pre-existing personality, since you took pre-existing personalities and put them both in the trained and the untrained group. We can't do that in our tradition. We can't say to people, you can't take a meditation course because we want your brain to be neutral. Instead, we say, if you want to take the course, you're very welcome. And we can't say anybody can take our course because, as we discussed earlier, when we were discussing mental illness, chemical imbalance, emotional imbalance, cultural imbalance, not everybody is in the right time and place such that they can go away from home for 10 days, eat the food, follow the heart, waking in the morning, long hours of meditation. So it's harder to do a study of Vipassana because we are more affiliative and willing to teach people whenever they want to learn, and because our courses are harder and we can't say it's a random sample of people. The only people who come to a Vipassana course are already somewhat unique and different than the average person. So we have fewer studies that we're capable of participating in and fewer outcomes. I'm quite skeptical of most of those studies because of the sample selection bias. People who meditate are already a different group of people. And as we discussed earlier, Kory, I said it's like going to spring training in St. Petersburg, Florida, and watching the baseball players and thinking that they're good at playing baseball because they went to spring training. It's the other way around. They're at spring training because they're already good. So the meditators who are already committed meditators, say the monks and studies of monks from exotic countries, the issue you're studying is who decided to be a monk. Their brains are already probably a unique group of people, and they're already different whether they meditated or not. Conversely, if you're teaching people a kind of meditation that they would learn in an hour or a week or a class 1 hour a week, and then you study the difference between people who do and don't meditate, you're not studying anything even vaguely like Vipassana, and the results don't really seem of great interest to me.
Good. Thank you. So I think we'll stop there. This has been fun. These last two discussions, we've looked at the neurological, the biological, the social, cultural, psychological aspects of the practice. And in the upcoming sessions, we'll be looking at your old student essays. And so that will be fun. That will probably happen in September or October. So look forward to when we can do those. And until then, I wish you the best. And thank you again for being part of this and sharing all your knowledge and experience.
Okay, my pleasure. Thank you, Kory.
Thank you so much, Paul and Kory, for joining us today. On behalf of Pariyatti, I'd like to thank you all for attending this event.
Bye, everyone.